So this could be his K1 visa approval or denial.
It could be, yeah.
Would you like me to quote what you said to me that Beeran was there to hear?
I would love it.
You're on your own.
Oh, wow.
I have a lot to say to both Michael and Beeran, and they're either going to love it or hate it. Oh, I'm ready for this. I would say, yeah, that's probably still the case.
Okay.
I'm definitely spicier than Beeran.
Okay, my time is up.
Laura walked into that tell all like she had control of the story, but the second that immigration envelope came out, the whole room changed. Because this was not just another couple giving a cute little update about being happy after filming, this was Laura putting her future with Beeran on display while Michael sat close enough to watch it all happen, carrying the kind of resentment that does not need a speech to announce itself. She had a fiancé. She had a ring that looked like an upgrade from the red string proposal. She had a possible K1 visa update sitting unopened in her hands, and she had a best friend who already looked like he was not there to celebrate anything, which is exactly why this moment felt less like a relationship update and more like a public stress test where every answer could create a new problem. The first thing Laura and Beeran needed to prove was simple, at least on paper, whether they were still together, and they were, which should have been the easy win of the segment, because after everything that happened in Turkey, after the questions around Beeran's gambling, his stability, his future, and Michael's place in Laura's life, the fact that they were still standing as a couple could have been framed as progress. Beeran had even replaced the string with a real ring, and that matters because symbols matter in relationships, especially when the first symbol was so fragile that half the audience probably wondered if it came from a drawer, a craft kit, or the emotional clearance aisle. But a better ring does not automatically mean a better foundation. And that is where the tell all started getting interesting. Because every time Laura and Beeran seemed to move one step towards stability, another unanswered question followed right behind them. Then, Sean brought up the K1 visa, and suddenly the conversation stopped being about romance and became about reality. Because rings are emotional, but immigration papers are practical. And practical pressure is where a lot of reality TV love stories stop sounding like fairy tales and start sounding like paperwork with background music. Laura revealed that she had received an envelope from immigration and had not opened it yet, which immediately turned the entire stage into a waiting room for her relationship's future. That choice alone says a lot, because Laura did not just bring information, she brought suspense. And whether she wanted support, validation, drama, or all three at once, opening that letter in front of the cast, Sean, Beeran, and Michael meant everyone got to watch her relationship hang in the air at the same time. And Michael being there changes everything, because if this letter is good news, then he has to sit there and watch Laura move closer to a future with Beeran, the man who took the emotional space Michael used to occupy. But if the news is bad, then Michael gets to watch the relationship hit a wall. And the uncomfortable part is that his face did not look neutral enough to make that feel harmless. He had not even joined the main confrontation yet, but the triangle was already alive, because Laura was not only waiting for an immigration update, she was sitting between a fiancé who represented her next chapter and a friend who clearly had unfinished feelings about losing his place in her life, whether he wanted to admit that or not. That is what makes the letter the first real trap of this whole segment, because there is almost no clean outcome. If it is approval, Laura and Beeran look stronger, but Michael's bitterness becomes harder to hide. If it is denial, Laura and Beeran face a real logistical problem that could make the relationship harder to continue. If it is not a clear yes or no, then nobody gets relief, and the uncertainty becomes its own kind of pressure. That is why Laura's smile, Beeran's calm, and Michael's silence all felt like different versions of tension. Laura seemed like she wanted proof that this choice was working, Beeran seemed like he wanted to look steady enough to be trusted, and Michael seemed like someone watching a door close while pretending he was never standing near it. Then Laura started reading, and the first words sounded bad enough to make the room tighten, because the letter said it did not grant any immigration status or benefit, which is exactly the kind of sentence that can make hope collapse before anybody understands the full meaning. And right there, the story stopped being about whether Laura and Beeran were still together, because they were, at least for now. The real question became whether this relationship was actually moving forward, or whether the tell-all was about to expose that Laura still had far more uncertainty around Beeran, Michael, and her own future than she wanted to admit. The moment everyone realizes the immigration letter is not a final denial, Laura gets just enough relief to breathe again, but not enough certainty to relax, and that is where this whole update becomes more uncomfortable, because the biggest problem is no longer inside the envelope, it is sitting, right beside the relationship itself. The letter is only another step in the K1 process, so Laura can still hold on to hope, Beeran can still picture a future in America, and the room can briefly act like this is good news, but that relief does not last long, because sometimes the paper you are afraid of is not what exposes thee. Relationship, sometimes it is the conversation that happens right after everyone thinks the danger has passed. Laura chooses to look at the positive side, and on one level that makes sense, because if the process is still moving, then the relationship still has a path forward, and if she has another reason to go back to Turkey, then she gets more time with Beeran and another chance to see whether there. Connection can survive outside the pressure of cameras, distance, and everybody else's opinions. She also brings up the possibility of surgery, and suddenly Beeran gets a moment where he can look more supportive than skeptical viewers might have expected, because he says he is willing to take care of her while she recovers, which gives him the kind of responsible fiancé image he badly needs. After everything people already know about his gambling, debt, and unstable living situation. For a second, Beeran is not the risk. He is the man offering to show up, care for her, and help her through something physically and emotionally vulnerable. But that is exactly why the next shift matters, because if Laura is going to spend weeks recovering in Turkey, then the obvious question becomes where they are actually going to stay, and that question pulls the story away from romance and right back into the practical details that Beeran has. Never fully cleaned up, his living situation had already been one of the major concerns around him. He was not presented as someone with a neat, stable setup and a clear financial plan. He was presented as a man with debt, gambling issues, and no fixed living arrangement, so when the conversation moves to his hometown, his parents, and the fact that Laura still has not met his family, the mood starts changing again. Beeran says his relationship with his father is difficult, that they fight often, and that he wants to protect Laura from toxic people in his life, and to be fair, that could be true, because not every family introduction is safe, simple, or emotionally clean, despite what reality TV likes to pretend while arranging seating charts for maximum public discomfort. The problem is that Beeran's explanation only works until the next missing detail appears, and then suddenly, the whole story feels different, because Laura learns on that stage that the apartment he is living in with his parents actually belongs to him. That is not a tiny detail. That is not forgetting to mention a favorite snack, a weird childhood nickname, or some other useless human decoration. That is property. That is housing. That is money. That is stability. And for a couple discussing immigration, surgery, debt, recovery, and marriage, it is exactly the kind of information Laura should not be discovering at the same time as everyone watching from the couches. Laura's shock matters because it exposes the pattern, not just the fact. Beeran may not believe he lied if he never said the opposite, but relationships are not courtrooms where you win by technically avoiding perjury. If your fiancé thinks you are couch surfing, drowning in debt, and trying to build a future from shaky ground while you own an apartment she does not know about, that is not just privacy. That is a major gap in the story she has been using to decide whether to trust you. And when Laura asks the obvious question, why he did not sell the apartment to help pay off the debt, the pressure gets even sharper, because now the apartment is not only a secret, it is tied directly to the financial chaos that made people doubt Beeran in the first place. His answer may have logic in it. He says selling it now would not cover everything, and that keeping it could be a long-term investment, and maybe he also does not want to throw his parents out or turn one family problem into another. That part is not impossible to understand. But the explanation does not erase the timing. It does not erase the fact that Laura found out late. It does not erase the feeling that Beeran gives information only when the conversation leaves him no room to keep it hidden. And that is where Laura's situation becomes more complicated, because she wants to believe this man is growing, she wants to believe the ring means commitment, the visa process means future, and the recovery plan means care, but every new reveal forces her to ask whether Beeran is becoming more honest, or simply becoming better at explaining things after the truth has already landed. So now the visa is still alive. The relationship is still alive, and Beeran has even gained a few points by offering to support Laura through surgery, but under all of that is a much harder question. Whether Laura is moving forward with a man who is finally becoming stable, or with a man who keeps letting her discover stability in pieces, only after everyone else is already watching. And as uncomfortable as the apartment reveal is, it is not even the biggest financial surprise Beeran has left, because once the debt comes back into the conversation, the whole room is about to hear a story that sounds almost too perfect to be simple. Beeran's apartment reveal was already enough to make Laura pause, but the moment he says he has another surprise, the whole conversation shifts into something much bigger, because now it is not just about what he owns, it is about what he owes, what he hid, and whether Laura is being updated about her own future in real time, like she is another audience member sitting on the stage. He tells everyone he paid off the gambling debt, and Laura's reaction says almost everything, because this is not the face of someone who already knew her fiancé had solved one of the biggest problems in their relationship. This is the face of someone hearing life-changing financial news in public, at the same time as the host, the cast, Michael, and everybody watching at home, which keeps bringing the same uncomfortable pattern back into the room. Beeran may be giving Laura good news, but he keeps giving it to her late, and that is where the good news starts feeling less clean. Nearly $50,000 in debt is not some small detail you casually forget to mention between travel plans and ring upgrades. That kind of debt shapes decisions, timelines, living arrangements, immigration plans, and the level of risk Laura is actually accepting by staying with him, so when Beeran says it is gone, it should be a relief, but instead, the first question is why Laura did not already know. And that is the strange thing about Beeran in this segment. Every reveal makes him look better and worse at the same time. Owning an apartment can make him look more stable, but hiding it makes him look less transparent. Paying off debt can make him look responsible, but revealing it on stage makes the relationship look like it still has missing pages. Human beings really do love turning progress into a suspicious little obstacle course. Then comes the explanation, and that is where the room really splits. Beeran says he went to Cyprus to gamble and hit a jackpot that allowed him to clear the debt, and on the surface, some people will hear that and say the result is what matters. The debt is paid, Laura is not being asked to carry it, Beeran paid for parts of her trip. And maybe this is the moment where he finally proves he can take care of business instead of just talking about it. That is the most generous reading, and it cannot be ignored, because if someone fixes a major financial problem, it is fair to acknowledge the outcome. But the harder reading is sitting right next to it, because using gambling to pay off gambling debt does not exactly scream transformation. It screams that the same behavior that created danger also got rewarded, and that can be even more dangerous than failure. That is why the jackpot story feels so convenient and so unsettling at the same time. Beeran says the amount he won matched what he needed, and maybe that is true, but for viewers already unsure about his judgment, that detail is going to sound almost too perfect, like the universe suddenly decided to become his accountant. The issue is not simply whether he won, the issue is what that win teaches him. If Beeran already believed he could gamble his way out of debt, then winning may not humble him, it may confirm the exact belief Laura needed him to outgrow. That is the trap inside the celebration. A lucky outcome can remove a financial problem while strengthening the mindset that created it. Laura is now stuck in a difficult emotional position because she wants to be relieved, and honestly, why wouldn't she? One of the biggest barriers in her relationship has supposedly disappeared. Beeran is talking like a man ready to move forward, and the future suddenly looks less impossible than it did when debt was hanging over everything. But relief can make people softer toward details they should still question, and Laura has already had to absorb too many surprises in one sitting. The apartment, the family distance, the debt payoff, the jackpot, all of it keeps arriving as if Beeran's life is a file he only opens when someone asks the exact right question. Then Beeran says he will stop gambling as a way to make money, and that promise becomes the real test. Because it is easy to say you are done right after the biggest win makes you look powerful, lucky, and vindicated. It is much harder to walk away when the behavior you are supposed to quit just handed you the perfect defense. If Beeran can actually stop, this could be the first sign that he understands the difference between surviving a problem and changing a pattern. But if he cannot, then the debt payoff is not the end of the story. It is only the most flattering chapter before the risk starts again. So the audience is left divided, And that division is exactly what makes this moment so loaded. Maybe Beeran is becoming more stable. Maybe he is only temporarily lucky. Maybe Laura is right to see progress. Maybe she is accepting too many late explanations because she wants the relationship to work. And just when Beeran starts to look like the man trying to prove himself, the whole spotlight shifts. Because Michael is about to step into the conversation, and suddenly Laura's financial doubts are about to collide with an old friendship that sounds anything but finished. Michael walking onto that stage changes the whole temperature of the tell-all, because up until this point, Beeran was the man under pressure. Beeran was the one being questioned about debt, gambling, housing, hidden details, and whether he was stable enough for Laura's future. But the second Michael sits down, the spotlight shifts from Beeran's finances to Michael's feelings, and suddenly the most unstable person in the room may not be the man everyone came prepared to judge. Michael does not enter like a calm friend hoping to clear the air. He enters with tension already in his face. And that matters, because before he even explains what happened in Turkey, the audience can feel that this friendship did not just fade quietly, it cracked in a way both of them are still trying to control. At first, Michael frames the problem as Laura mistreating him during the trip, and the airport comment becomes his chosen proof, because he claims she told him he was on his own. And he brings it up like it was not just a rude moment, but the symbol of how abandoned and dismissed he felt. Laura does not deny saying the words, which makes the moment sharper, because now the question is not whether it happened, the question is what it meant. She says it was a joke, that it was about an airline upgrade, that Michael wanted help getting the same kind of travel benefit she had, and that she did not want to share her method because then everyone would be doing it, which already sounds like a strange hill for an entire best friendship to die on. But reality TV friendships apparently can survive years of emotional confusion and then collapse over airport logistics because civilization remains unserious. But the real issue was never just the ticket. That detail is only the doorway into something deeper, because Laura's version of the story is that Michael changed when Beeran became the center of her attention. And that is where the fight stops being about one comment and starts becoming about emotional territory. Laura says Michael did not want a committed relationship with her, but he still wanted the closeness, the attention, the daily access, and the comfort of being treated like the most important man in her life until Beeran stepped into that space and Michael suddenly had to watch someone else, receive what he used to get without having to define it. The cast does challenge Laura, and that part is fair enough to examine, because bringing Michael to Turkey while she was building something with Beeran was always risky. Even if Laura believed Michael was only a friend, the emotional history between them was not clean, and putting him close to her new fiancé gave every unresolved feeling a stage to perform on, because apparently one stage was not enough. The Turkey trip needed a prequel. But Laura's counterpoint is also hard to ignore. If Michael truly never wanted her romantically, if he was never interested, if he was simply a friend, then why did her closeness with Beeran seem to bother him so much? That is where Josh's observation lands hard, because Michael may not have wanted Laura, but he may not have wanted anyone else to have her either, and that single idea reframes almost everything about his reaction. It does not mean Michael was secretly in love with her. It means he may have been attached to his position in her life, attached to being needed, attached to being emotionally central without carrying the responsibility that comes with commitment. That kind of dynamic can feel harmless when nobody else is competing for the space, but once Laura chose Beeran, Michael was forced to see what he had lost, and his bitterness started saying more than his denial. Then Beeran steps in, and this is the unexpected reversal. Earlier, Beeran was the questionable one, the man with secrets, debt, gambling, and shaky explanations, but in this confrontation, he looks calmer than Michael, and when he tells Michael to speak to Laura politely, the power in the room shifts. Suddenly Beeran is not only defending himself, he is defending Laura, while Michael, the supposed best friend, looks like the person attacking her. That contrast is dangerous for Michael because even if he has valid hurt, his delivery makes it harder to hear, and even if Beeran still has unanswered questions around him, his composure makes him look more mature in this exact moment. So now Laura is trapped between two uncomfortable truths. Michael may have real reasons to feel hurt, but his reaction also makes him look possessive of a role he refused to fully claim. Beeran may look stronger by comparison, but that does not erase the financial secrets that came before. And when Michael starts talking like he is ready to stay out of Laura's life permanently, the question becomes bigger than who was right in Turkey. Because Laura may be leaving the stage with her fiancé beside her, but she may also be losing the friend who used to know her best and the harder. Question is whether she is walking into something healthier or simply trading one unstable emotional bond for another. By the end of this tell-all, Laura technically still has the relationship she came in defending, but that does not mean she leaves with the certainty she wanted, because sometimes the most uncomfortable ending is not a breakup. It is a relationship surviving while every weakness around it becomes clearer. Michael walks away from the stage acting like he is done, saying he has other friends, saying he is investing his time somewhere else, even throwing in that comment about karma like a man who wants to sound detached while still leaving one last emotional bruise on the table. And that is the strange part, because Michael keeps insisting he did not want Laura in that way, but his anger keeps making that denial harder to believe cleanly, not because it proves secret romance, but because it proves he cared about losing his place. Laura does not get to leave that fight looking completely innocent either, because even if Michael's bitterness was loud, even if his delivery made him look defensive and wounded, she still brought a friendship with messy history into a romantic situation that was almost guaranteed to explode. Michael was not just some casual buddy meeting her fiancé for coffee. He was someone who had already lived in that blurry emotional zone with her, close enough to matter, unclear enough to cause damage. And once Beeran became the person getting Laura's attention, the whole friendship was forced to show what it was built on. That is where the breakup of the friendship feels less like one sudden disaster and more like something that was already cracking, waiting for the right pressure to expose it. But Beeran looking better than Michael in one argument does not automatically make Beeran the safe choice, and that is the part Laura cannot afford to ignore. Yes, Beeran stayed calmer. Yes, he defended her when Michael crossed a line. Yes, he now looks more committed than he did before, with the ring, the visa process, the offer to care for her during recovery, and the claim that his debt is gone. Those are real points in his favor. But the same tell-all also showed that Laura is still finding out major details late, and that is not a small issue when marriage, immigration, money, housing, surgery, and long-distance planning are all on the table. A man can be calmer than the other man in the room and still not be fully transparent. Human standards are depressingly low sometimes, but they do still exist. That is why the ending is not as simple as Laura choosing Beeran and Michael losing. The real story is that Laura is standing between two different kinds of instability. Michael seemed to want emotional access without the responsibility of commitment, while Beeran seems to want commitment, but still controls how much truth Laura receives at one time. One man had history with her, but could not handle being replaced. The other man has a future with her, but keeps revealing important facts after the audience has already started questioning him. Neither dynamic is completely clean, and that is what makes the tell all more than just a fight between a fiancé and a best friend. The visa letter is still not a final answer. It did not end the relationship, but it also did not secure the future. Laura may go back to Turkey, and if she does, Beeran's promise to care for her after surgery becomes more than sweet talk, it becomes evidence. That visit would show whether he can actually be steady when life is inconvenient, when recovery is slow, when romance has to become responsibility, and when there is no easy jackpot moment to make everything look fixed. His gambling promise also remains unproven, because saying he will stop after winning big is one thing, but actually walking away after the win rewarded the behavior is a much harder test. The debt may reportedly be paid, but the pattern still has to be watched, and Michael's exit creates its own risk, because losing him may remove one source of conflict from Laura's relationship, but it also removes one of the people who knew her before Beeran, one of the people who could challenge her choices even if he was too emotionally tangled to do it cleanly. Laura may feel freer without Michael's resentment sitting beside her, but freedom can also become isolation if the only voice left is the voice she wants to believe. That is the uncomfortable trade-off. She may have protected her relationship, but she also lost a friendship that, flawed or not, had been part of her emotional world. So Laura does not walk out of this tell all with a perfect victory. She walks out with Beeran, but not with full certainty. She walks out with a ring, but also with unanswered questions. She walks out with hope in the K1 process, but no final approval. She walks out with a fiancé who says the debt is handled, but whose solution came through the same behavior that created concern in the first place. She walks out without Michael, but also without the illusion that every person close to her was playing a simple role. And maybe that is the real ending here. Not that Laura was wrong to choose Beeran over a friendship with unclear boundaries, but that choosing Beeran does not mean the hard questions disappear, because the next chapter will not be decided by a ring, a stage argument, or one lucky financial reveal. It will be decided by whether Beeran can be honest before he is cornered, whether Laura can question love without feeling like she is betraying it, and whether this relationship can survive when the cameras stop catching the surprises and real life starts demanding proof.